Alrighty, it is September 8th. As I'm doing this, I'll probably be up tomorrow, but as I was going around, I just finished up with author Stephen Walton's live chat after going through a few hoops. And I wanted to find, I knew there was a video from about 89, I think, where Roddenberry's at a convention in LA. And one thing he mentions, that you have to have an entertaining show first before anything else, otherwise no one's going to care. It's kind of a direct rebuttal of, the platform, the message comes first. No, the message does not come first. The story comes first. It's basic storytelling. But I came across this little thing here from about a year ago from Intergalactic something or whatever science. But going on about a diatribe about how Roddenberry didn't write anything. It's all about, well, let's just take a look here.
Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor Templar here, and as usual, the disinformation goes. People know nothing. Gene Roddenberry did not write Star Trek. I mean, this is one of the many things out there that people just don't seem to understand.
No, sir. What you fail to understand is how television works, and plus you also know how to read an IMDb page, because you can find out Roddenberry's actual writing credits. And how many Star Trek episodes he did write. And the role of an executive producer, especially on a show that's just starting out like Star Trek, he rewrote every show that came down the pike in those early days. To the point where some of the writers on there, prefer to went for the pseudonym. Because they've been so heavily rewritten by Roddenberry. So, and also, Roddenberry created the premise for the show. You had to start somewhere, and it started with him. March of '64, he wrote this thing, Star Trek is, and laid out the basic plot, the thing of how it works. So, yeah. And he says in the thing, a lot of research. You didn't do any research. You picked up a couple of half-truths here and there and one on your own. So let's continue here.
First of all, Roddenberry was kind of an odd guy, and I think a lot of things can be summed up that he was involved in very strange things and even black governmental projects.
Again, nothing to do with Star Trek. I don't know why he's even bowing there.
He came from a criminal law enforcement background. Daddy was a cop, he was a cop. That should tell you quite a bit.
Full disclosure, yeah, the family moved to L.A. when Gene was a little kid, and his dad got a job in the LAPD. This is back in the bad old days of the 30s and 40s. And right out of college, pretty much, Roddenberry joined the Army Air Corps and flew Blue 17s in the Pacific. And when he came back, yeah, he's the kind of, what else are you going to do? You come out of the military, you become a cop after. Kind of, natural progression at that point. And he was a motorcycle cop for a while. He also basically worked vice. He worked drug cases and stuff. So, but the idea was always he wanted to be a writer. And it led into that. You want to learn how to life on the streets, and write for cop shows, become a cop. And he did write. Some uncredited or under pseudonyms because the LAPD didn't allow moonlighting in those days. But he wrote for some fairly prominent. He really got started writing speeches for the LAPD chief. Even though he violently disagreed with the chief's ideas, he managed to put some pretty good speeches together. And then served as a technical consultant like on Dragnet and Mr. District Attorney and a few other Highway Patrol. And this was back in the so. It was all to the thing of being a writer, but let's get back here.
Certainly absolutely no morality there, and they work for the corporations.
Gee, biased much against police?
One of the things that's very interesting with Star Trek is that, first of all, Roddenberry's conception of Star Trek was a space opera. It was supposed to be an opera. He really wanted to have it on boats in the ocean. It was because it was the time close to the lunar landing, the moon landing, he changed it over from boats to space.
I'm not sure where he's getting this from, because Star Trek has pretty much always been a space show, except for a brief period when it reverted to an adaptation of Jules Verne's Masters of the World, where it was going to be on a dirigible, a big airship flying around, but then it reverted back to being, And briefly, it was Gulliver. Weren't directly invoking Jonathan Swift by naming the ship the Gulliver, but it always, almost always, was going to be a spaceship show.
And it was then sold to Desilu Studios, the concepts, etc. But, as with most things in life, particularly when it comes to media, movies, TV, there's a multitude of people behind the basic idea.
That's television. That's one of the reasons why certain folks like me and other ones don't like working in television, because it's too many chiefs, not enough Indians, and it's just nothing. You can, radio, you can be a one-man show. YouTube, you can really be a one-man show. But television, you gotta have other people involved. You gotta, you can't just be an executive producer and do everything. Obviously, you can't act. There's everything. You can't do the set design. You gotta have other people involved. It's just the nature of the beast. But also, how this guy just totally blows off everything he'd done to this point. Have Gun Will Travel? He wrote 23 scripts for that show. He won an award or two, I think, for one of the scripts. Just check his IMDb page under the category of writer. And again, did not write Star Trek. He wrote quite a few Star Treks. Not of them great. I mean, he was very proud of the Omega glory. Well, I suspect that may have been before they snipped out one little crucial bit explaining how the Combs and the Yangs may have come about, which made one little snip of like 2 seconds of dialogue totally destroyed the entire show. But not that it was a great grind in the first place. But
and they all contribute huge amounts to a production that you will consider, well, this came from the creator. Well, it didn't. Somebody makes the actual sets, so what a set looks like, the colors used. It's nothing to do with the writer. The uniforms, well, that's the costume person. They designed that. There's no uniform. Roddenberry didn't specify a uniform. He didn't
Who do you think approves all this stuff? The executive producer. Who was that? Gene Roddenberry. Who do you think hired all these people? Gene Roddenberry. So, yeah, it seems like he's grabbing a lot of credit in later years. There may have been also a little bit of shorthand in Roddenberry's thinking. It's like, everybody knows nobody does this alone. The names are known. Most hardcore fans know the name Matt Jeffries and Bill Tice and Bob Justman and Gene L. Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana and Freddie Phillips. They know them all, so they didn't have to go deferring credit to a lot of people are already dead anyway. And he had a hand in approving this stuff. So he's not totally stealing credit. He had a credit in approving the damn thing. So let's get realistic here.
Specify what the actual captain's deck would look like. All these things were very, very general, and people came in who made the sets and made it look like that, and these are based on the technology available at the time. So if you could think that he actually wrote any of that, it's kind of amusing.
One, I don't think anybody thinks he actually wrote all of this except for really demented people who need really seriously to get a life.
The other thing, which is so paramount to Star Trek, which is Spock, was not his invention, other than there being a first officer called that.
And this kind of shows up a little bit of lack of research on this guy's part. One, Spock was not the first officer. It was a part he wrote specifically for Majel, who was his girlfriend at the time. Majel Barrett. Later became his wife, but at the time, no, he was his mistress. But, Spock was literally the guy with the ears. There was one thing, it was all along, which was kind of reddish color, may have had a tail, he ate through a metal plate in his belly, but the one thing that was always constant was the pointed ears. The one thing and on that respect, yeah, he may have stolen the look from Marvel Comics and Namor the Submariner, who appeared back in like 1940. But aside from that, no, Spock was Gene's thing, and he insisted. He even threw Majel overboard to keep Spock after the pilot stage.
Well, first of all, it was the actor Leonard Nimoy who came up with the pointed ears, etc. He also...
Bull. Flat out bull. The Pioneers were there from the very beginning before he'd ever heard of Leonard Nimoy.
Came up with the entire Spock persona, this is it logical captain, this type of thing that everybody thought was so wonderful and we should all act like robots. I remember that in school, people thought, well, it's because that was the gossip.
Again, bull. The original pilot, the logical computer mind was number one. Spock was literally just the guy with the ears. He was the visible reminder that we're in the future and we have aliens working amongst us. And it was during the process of, NBC said, well, we don't like her, we don't like that. That's when they said, okay, we need to keep the computer mind. Let's give Spock some personality, give him the computer mind and the logical approach, and we'll find something else for Majel. So, but Nimoy did not come up with that. He was handed it to him. This is how Spock's going to be going forward. Can you do this? Oh, yeah. Okay. Bill Shatner coming in. What he's going to say in a minute. Yeah, it makes a good counterbalance to Bill Shatner bouncing off the walls.
Certainly was not a good character as far as I'm concerned, but an interesting one.
Didn't think Spock was a good character. This is the character that TV Guide listed amongst the top 100 characters in the entire history of television. And ranked pretty highly, too, if I recall.
Now, if you see the actual pilot of Star Trek, you will see that Spock acted like an emotional person. Captain, we need help down here. It was absolutely the opposite. That's because the original pilot star, the actor who played Captain Kirk...
First thing, he wasn't playing Captain Kirk, he was playing Captain Pike. So this puts a little bit of a lie to the thing about he watched all kinds of research. You didn't even watch the damn thing, did you?
Was very understated, very low-key. And Leonard Nimoy stated this. So he said, well, what he needed was somebody who was very aggressive and excited because he was so low-key to make it work. It just shows you what a talented actor Leonard Nimoy was to do that. When William Shatner took over, who was a very gregarious person, Leonard Nimoy decided to take this character into this very logical person, which is what the series was all about. Pilots are usually quite different than the series themselves with actors, etc. It's quite amazing the people who were in the original pilots that don't make it to the actual series.
That's the one truly accurate thing this guy's said so far. Yeah, pilots change radically, those that make it to series. A lot of things. And generally, pilots are not intended to air. That's another thing a lot of people don't quite get. Usually a pilot never sees the light of day. They'll do a test screening with some, and I've been to a few of these, they'll test screening at some hotel somewhere where they have a bunch of TVs set around. They'll sit around and they, take down little note cards or what did you like, what didn't you like. And I've seen a few pilots, and some of them I think probably should have sold, but that's just me. But no actor, especially at this point, where Nimoy had only done he'd only had a job to that point in acting that lasted most was like a couple of weeks. He was doing guest spots all over the place. He played a lot of Indians. He played a lot of, gangsters and hoods and whatever, Other than that, he spent a lot of time, driving taxi cab to make ends meet. So certainly no actor at that level of the food chain is going to take his character in such a radical direction on his own on a show that's just starting. Because, let's see, in 1960, first pilot in 64, second pilot in 65, and the show started in 66. The only established actor on that thing, really, who'd even done a regular series was Bill Shatner. And he was still a bit of an up-and-comer. He was in his, mid-30s. Same with Nimoy, but Nimoy was, that guy in that thing. At the time, he'd done a lot of guest spots on a lot of TV shows, and they even crossed paths with Bill Shatner one time on Man from U.N.C.L.E. just a couple years earlier. But he did not have the kind of clout. I'm going to play him like this. No, you're not. You're playing him the way he's written. Now they were given a lot of leeway to add to it, but they were not, given the leeway to come up with entire new concepts of their own. Spock becoming a logical thing and building the Vulcan background. That was all Roddenberry and his writers after the pilot, and they had, they're divvying up the character traits. Okay, well, number one's got to go, but I want that same kind of analytical mind on there. Let's put it in Spock. He's got nothing going anyway, so let's give him a personality, and it'll be a good counterbalance to Shatner, Not to him, but before they even got Shatner. But,
So that's very fast. So the actual persona of Captain Kirk as well was totally developed by Shatner. There was general guidelines. So it really amazes me that the key factors of all these things, and the capper to it all, is that Gene Roddenberry never in the thought of his little pea brain thought about one of the major things that Star Trek is known about. Klingons. Klingons were invented by the producer. They needed to have adversaries. Conflict is what makes entertainment. People can't sit around saying, oh, you're good looking. Oh, you're better looking. Oh, this is good. No, you have to have conflict. So the conflict is that the producer at that time brought in the Klingons, which is a major part of Star Trek.
Okay, Klingons. Yeah, Gene Kuhn did come up with the Klingons. Roddenberry, though, apparently came up with a name based on a friend of his, a guy he knew in the LAPD, Wilbur Klingon. Slightly different spelling, but, Yeah, and Roddenberry had his hand in everything, okay? And it was halfway through the first season. How much do you want freaking done right off the bat? Wasn't even sure there was going to be a recurring enemy at that point, all right? So for Christ's sakes, But there's a process that goes around there. The story comes in. It's like, okay, we can work with this. We'll bounce around. They work with the producers. Anyway, it was later half of the first season. So, Gene Kuhn was on board by then. And you bounce it. You got to talk to the executive producer, Gene Roddenberry. And so here's a guy who's got an interesting script here with a rival race here. Yeah, how about, let's call them Klingons. I wanted to use Wilbur's name. Roddenberry was a magpie. He would pick up little things here and there and eventually filter them back in. There's a few recurring things, like Shatner. Kirk's middle name being Tiberius. It was also the middle name of the lead character in The Lieutenant, which was one big, played by Gary Lockwood, William Tiberius Rice. So all that stuff comes up over and over again with Roddenberry stuff.
Trek. Who do you think about when you think of Star Trek? Well, probably Dr. Spock to start off with.
Big tell right there. Dr. Spock, please.
Then the Klingon second, and of course, Captain Kirk. So the whole idea is that this was all part of this non-inventing of Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry had a very primitive understanding of Star Trek that was developed by a large team of people, and this is very true with all media, TV, movies, etc. The input is dramatic. If a scene looks good because there's cool costumes, it probably had nothing to do with the writers. Somebody had to design those costumes for each and individual person.
And somebody has to approve the expenditure on making those costumes. Bob Justman was not acting alone on this. He had to run it by Roddenberry first, okay? And Roddenberry was there at every test fitting, especially with the actresses involved that came in. He was there for checking out how their skimpy little outfits fit.
So it's very important to understand that and understand what kind of a mediocre talent so many people are. As I said, Roddenberry was a very strange individual, and he actually even tried to extort money from William Shatner. Now, Shatner states this in his book, written by his autobiography up until now. He clearly states there, both in writing and in his audio book, which I have, that he needed to go out to a particular show where he would make $2,000. You got to remember, this was time when Star Trek was not paying a lot and it was just new, and this was a lot of money. Especially back in the 70s, $2,000 probably equivalent to $10,000 now, maybe more. He wanted time off early on a Friday so he could go to this convention or meeting or speaking, etc., because this was a great deal. And of course, Roddenberry refused. He said, "You gotta, I can maybe make a deal with you if you pay me part of your speaking fee." And follow that up with the fact that you should learn who's the king here, who's in control, and who you need to be subservient to. I'm in charge. Well, I don't think anybody would respond too well to that atmosphere, but certainly William Shatner said, "Hey, forget it. I'm not going to put up with this," and left that particular meeting. And apparently something was come to some agreement, and he did finally go. But
okay, there's a ring of this sounds like Roddenberry, because he was everywhere trying to get as much money as he could out of this whole thing, including inventing lyrics to the theme song. Was never intended to have lyrics, but he threw them on there so that whenever it was played, where he would get, even if they never sung, he'd get half the royalties, which didn't exactly win him over with Alexander Courage. But there's a little bit of context here. The program, it wasn't like shooting a regular TV show, which was like maybe 5-6 days and you got it. No, this was minimum 6, sometimes 7 or 8 days. There'd be overlapping in production. This kind of situation eventually led to that 2-part clip show, The Menagerie, in order to make up some time. But normally they were constantly running over and behind schedule. So, and he was also having problems with Shatner and Nimoy and even D. Kelly trying to showboat a little bit and, gain a little clout they didn't necessarily have at that point, and swapping lines back and forth and all that stuff. And Roddenberry was having none of it at that point. There's a letter that circulated around chewing all 3 of them out, for all 3 of them being prima donnas on the production. So he had to exercise a certain amount of authority there, because there's a very strong personality here with the 3 of them. Even though D. Kelly is a little more soft-spoken about it, he had an ego too. So anybody who wants to go into acting has got to have an ego. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. So, again, depending on when this happened, what episode they were working on the thing, or how far behind they were, or if they were behind, asking for time off on for a Friday when they're probably up to their necks in production of a certain episode, it's like, no. You're not, unless you make it worth my while, Bill. No, you're not going anywhere. You're going right back on the stage. You're going to finish the day out. So again, you gotta take things into context here.
What a kind of nasty thing to do with someone you're working. And of course, Roddenberry at that time wasn't making much money either. He never made that much in the bigger picture, apparently, from a lot of the Star Trek stuff until the movie was made sometime later. But he wrote a lot of different scripts for a whole bunch of known programs in the 60s. And this is what he did mainly. The Star Trek was only popular on TV for 3 years.
Only popular on TV for 3 years? Oh, wait. Did the entire 70s just miss you by Star Trek phenomenon? Does it ring any bells? I mean, it was it was the most expensive show on television at the time, and the rating, it did solidly in the ratings despite the myth that NBC kept putting out there. But they were iffy enough for the expense of the show that they were justified and said, well, it's not doing that well. For the equivalent of $1 million an episode at that time, it would have had to have won the night every night it was ever on for them to feel justified in doing this. Plus, they also didn't like Roddenberry for various reasons that predate Star Trek. But yeah, this guy hasn't done any research on what the hell he's looking at.
And the movie was made quite some time in the future when the Star Trek movie came out, and he wasn't even part of that to a large degree. He had a different story.
He was a big part of the movie. In fact, that he was part of one of the big problems with the movie because he kept screwing things up. But that was another issue entirely. But he was there. Okay, he was there, and they had to. God's having to run stuff by him. Okay, it took
So he's a very strange individual. All the things you think about Star Trek is something that was created by the production team or the actual actors themselves. And this is very true with one of these other very popular shows from the 70s called $6 Million Man.
Now, I don't know anything about the $6 Million Man production, so I can't speak to that. But what is being described here is, oh, you didn't represent. Yeah, that's true of television in general. Under very rare circumstances, unless your star of the show is the executive producer and also very multi-talented, no, everything's going to be brought in by somebody else other than the executive producer. So I don't know what this guy's trying to prove with this. You know?
Who came out as a sexy spy kind of guy. And even the theme song was Catch 'em if you can, love 'em if you can. And this was a whole different than the classic $6 Million Man actual longer series. The first year was this quasi-spy thing, which I guess didn't do so well. So they finally revamped it, thanks to a lot of internal people, and came up with that really cool $6 Million Man that we're all familiar with.
I remember the $6 Million Man. It was always a bit of a spy thing going. He was always going off on assignments for the OSI, you know, reporting back to Oscar, but he was always going off on that from the entire run of the damn series. So what the hell are you watching?
So, this is very important for everybody to note, that you're living in an illusion. Things and people are not what it appears, and everybody should really look into the facts. And it just depends whether you're out there. As a professional researcher like myself, I run into these things all the time. I'm listening to countless interviews, commentaries on films and other things, where you really get the insights of what's going on and who really does things.
Clearly not watching anything regarding Star Trek, one of the most documented TV series in the history of the medium. So, again, I don't know what the hell you're looking at, guy, but you really half-ass this one.
And here's a plain case of Roddenberry, and his conception of Star Trek was really nothing of what's on the screen.
Yeah, I think you need to go back and actually look at that. There's actually a lot that really did make it through all the way. You know, in that first premise, you know, from March of '64, there's a lot of little story, you know, what you might call a TV guide descriptions, where you have a title and a blurb of what the general story was. There's quite a few of them became episodes later on, for better or worse. But no, I mean, it's one thing to say that Roddenberry's getting too much credit, but this gives him absolutely no credit whatsoever, and this is going too far. Okay. Because he was very involved in the show. And again, everything had to go through him, especially in the early days on there. And he rewrote every script that came through, to the point where he pissed off, you know, several writers, to where they had to bring in their pseudonyms because they wanted nothing to do with the show at that point. So yeah, he did write a lot of it. Okay. And while no, some of the stuff, the initial idea was somebody else, he still had to approve it before it got on air. Nothing really got on air on the original series without his say so. Okay. Now maybe he let stuff slide that wouldn't go before, like the later, like, you know, like after Gene Coon came on, that was more because he trusted Gene Coon enough to, you know, you can do a lot. He put his 2 cents worth in, but he wasn't, you know, hands-on as much. And third season, it's like, okay, that's it. They're going to can us in this year, so start looking somewhere else. But this just goes too far, especially on today. So, PayPal, Patreon, subscribe star down below, and we'll talk at you later.
Thank you.